the south bank of the Lehigh River, one of the most powerful companies the world has ever known flourished and made an indelible mark on history. It was the builder of 1,100 ships during World War II, supplier of steel for the Golden Gate Bridge, and for every bridge and tunnel that takes you from New Jersey into Manhattan, as well as for much of the Manhattan skyline. But on November 18, 1995, 140 years of metal production ceased in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This is the story of an industry and the town which it shaped and sustained. In 1861, the Bethlehem Iron Company was formed to provide quality rails to meet the needs of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Millionaire industrialist and president of Lehigh Valley Railroad, Asa Packer, and his chief engineer and railroad manager, Robert Sayre, enlisted the services of genius iron master John Fritz from western Pennsylvania. Fritz designed a complex of blast furnace and rolling mills to supply Lehigh Valley Railroad with wrought iron rails. Bethlehem Iron provided many miles of iron rail to Union forces during the Civil War to replace the tracks continuously removed by Confederate soldiers. About this time, John Fritz spearheaded the construction of a steel mill across the tracks from the iron mill to construct rails using a Bessemer converter, a process used by the British to create rails superior to iron rails. The plant was a technological marvel. 2 blast furnaces were later added, but Sayre realized that Bethlehem could not stay competitive making steel rail with steel companies in western Pennsylvania who had an abundance of nearby coal for their coke-fired furnaces. He looked to diversify into other areas of opportunity. At this time, the U.S. Navy was ranked only 65th in the world. The chiefs of Bethlehem Iron knew that the Navy would soon award contracts for construction of steel warships with guns, armor, and machinery. Bethlehem decided to manufacture armor plate for ships, and it built an open-hearth furnace which would yield steel of higher quality and greater strength to meet the stringent demands of the Navy. Fritz also designed a heavy forging plant, America's first, to make gun forgings. Bethlehem won a $4 million contract with the Navy in 1887 and a like amount with the Army in 1891. In the initial days of Bethlehem Iron, the population of Bethlehem was less than 3,000, mostly Moravians on the north side of the Lehigh River. By 1901, the population had grown to 7,300, with about 4,000 of them working with the company now known as Bethlehem Steel Corporation and owned by Charles Schwab, a steel executive from western PA. These workers inhabited the south side of the city. German and Irish immigrants, Poles, Hungarians, Slovaks, Italians, Greeks, and later Mexicans populated the south side of Bethlehem with their ethnically diverse churches, parochial schools, and social clubs. For their part, the Bethlehem magnates contributed to the South Bethlehem community. Packer founded Lehigh University in 1865. Sayre and others started St. Luke's Hospital in 1873. The management of Bethlehem Steel, however, did not live like or among its workers. They lived in style and luxury, in stark contrast to the working poor in South Bethlehem. Charles Schwab, banking on the future of structural steel and high-rise buildings, turned his focus from shipbuilding. He built the Gray Mill, using a patented process for making stronger, lighter, more adaptable, less expensive beams. These wide I-beams, also called Bethlehem beams, were used in the new Gimbel Brothers department store in New York City, the Chicago Merchandise Mart, and the Chicago Opera House. Orders poured in. By 1910, there were 8,000 workers inhabiting South Bethlehem. Between 1923 and 1930, the collection of buildings erected with Bethlehem Steel included the 70-story Bank of Manhattan Tower, which is now 40 Wall Street, the 37-story Bank of America and the First National Bank buildings in Baltimore, the Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia, and the University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning. Later, the George Washington Bridge, Chrysler Building, and the Golden Gate Bridge would be built with steel from Bethlehem. World War I brought huge business opportunity for Bethlehem Steel. In 1915, Bethlehem received $50 million in ordnance orders from Britain and France, $135 million from the British Navy for guns, shrapnel shells, and 20 submarines. After America entered the war in April 1917, workers labored day and night building ships and munitions. By the end of the war in 1918, the steel employed 31,000 as the population of the city of Bethlehem approached 50,000. When Eugene Grace took over the helm of chairman in 1945, Bethlehem Steel was the 7th largest industrial company in America, with revenues of $1.3 billion. Likewise, during World War II, Bethlehem Steel provided an enormous contribution to the war effort. During the war, the steel had produced 73.4 million net tons of steel and built 1,100 fighting ships, cargo vessels, and tankers, making it the world's biggest shipbuilder of the war. As many as 2,500 women were hired in Bethlehem's war effort. Working conditions at Bethlehem were quite harsh. In fact, they were fraught with danger. From 1905 until the end of steel making in Bethlehem, 650 workers died in the steel plants. John Waldoni, one of the union's first organizers, recalls brutal working hours, along with bribery and favoritism in the 1930s. Plant workers toiled 6 days a week, often with double shifts, and there were no vacations. In 1942, the new United Steelworkers of America negotiated the first union contract. It was the beginning of the modern era of union management relations. While unions helped to improve the lot of steelworkers, it can be argued that union agreements helped contribute to the eventual demise of the steel. In 1956, the first cost of living escalator clause stipulates that steelmakers can't change past labor practices. This meant that although new technology might improve a process, the labor force cannot be reduced. Also with the unions came strikes. It was during these strikes that developers sought other sources of steel. They began to use European steel, and they tapped domestic mini-mills, which did not have the labor costs associated with union rates and the massive corporate overhead. In 1970, Bethlehem Steel thought that it had won the steel contract for the World Trade Center when it underbid the only other steel producer large enough to handle the job, U.S. Steel. But the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey gave the contract to a consortium of 15 companies that cut some of their costs by using foreign steel. Suddenly, the monopoly of Big Steel was over. But Big Steel was not really ready to change its mindset. It would continue with the insular and nearsighted outlook which had carried it in the past. It neglected to notice changing markets and reduced demand for steel, brought about by increased use of other materials such as aluminum and plastic. In 1977, Bethlehem faced the first of 15 years of losses. Every plant closure brought huge severance costs and new burdens on the pension plan, which soon was underfunded. In 1995, steel making ended in Bethlehem. In 2001, Bethlehem Steel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In 2003, the last of the company's assets were bought up and its name disappeared. Today, some of the property that was Bethlehem Steel has been demolished. Some of it is under development. A Sands Casino stands at the former site of the gigantic ore pit. A planned National Museum of Industrial History adjacent to the Sands may provide some acknowledgement of the men and women who toiled under the belching blast furnaces. I, for one, experience a sense of loss upon passing what little remains of Bethlehem Steel. It serves to jog my memory, where lives the view from our kitchen window of steam belching from the furnace stacks, the smell of the cokeworks on a humid day, the stream of workers, including my grandfather and Uncle Joyous, emerging from the plant gates at shift change, the faithful sounds of life and livelihood from a vibrant industrial giant and the tight surrounding neighborhoods on Bethlehem's south side, the trust that the life we know and things we love will always be there.